Greetings and welcome to the channel. My name is Dr. Gyesie, transformational coach here at Inner Mileage. And today we're going to focus on a key topic, which is how narcissistic abuse is an initiation into your spiritual awakening and how this can help empaths overcome themselves, limited self-beliefs, and align to their best lives right here, right now. So if you've ever found yourself in some of these painful experiences that you now understand to be narcissistic abuse, it is a primer for your own profound transformation. And in this video, we're exploring this paradigm shifting idea that narcissistic abuse isn't just an experience of pain and betrayal. It's a spiritual initiation, and it forces you to confront your deepest wounds, awaken your inner strength, and step into your purpose. So using insights from psychology, spirituality, even mythology, and some case studies, we'll unpack how this transformation unfolds. So let's start with the whole notion of narcissistic abuse as spiritual initiation. Narcissists often use manipulation tactics like gaslighting, future faking, and love bombing to create dependency, only to later devalue and discard you. And the cycle isn't just damaging to your self-esteem, it dismantles your whole identity. But why does this experience feel so existentially disruptive? Well, from a spiritual perspective, dear one, a narcissist or narcissistic abuse mirrors the initiation rites found in many ancient traditions. For example, in indigenous cultures, spiritual initiation often involved isolation, confrontation with fear, and a symbolic death of the old self. Similarly, narcissistic abuse strips away your illusions, your false sense of security, your reliance on external validation, and leaves you standing at the threshold of transformation. So let's get into the psychology of transformation. So narcissistic abuse is transformative. And we know that from a psychological perspective, many survivors of narcissistic abuse are empaths, people with heightened sensitivity and a deep capacity for compassion. Unfortunately, this also makes the empath a prime target for narcissists, but there's a twist. So psychologists like Carl Jung, the Swiss, argue that our deepest wounds contain the seeds of our greatest growth. Jung called this process individuation, which is the journey to becoming your true and whole self. Narcissistic abuse accelerates this process by forcing you to confront the parts of you've neglected. Why did you ignore red flags, for example? Why did you seek validation outside yourself? These are all questions that are key to breaking free. Once you understand the spiritual awakening process, which is non-linear, but here is a primer. And this primer is a primer into how this initiation of narcissistic abuse enables you to cross the threshold to the other shore, as is often said. The first stage is the breakdown, the dark night of the soul. And in this stage is the shattering of all your illusions. The illusions of your old self, the programs that were installed in your mind by your early caregivers, schools, etc. And when a narcissist betrays or abandons you, it's more than a heartbreak. It's a loss of your identity. And in spiritual terms, this is the dark night of the soul. St. John of the Cross described it as a period of profound spiritual desolation that leads to divine connection. The second reason, or the second rung in this spiritual initiation process, is shadow integration. In the words of psychologist Richard Schwartz, the founder of IFS, or Internal Family Systems, our inner wounds are like exiled parts of ourselves, waiting to be reintegrated. We're so fragmented because there is an alignment between our real face, our public face, and our private face, right? So there's a fragmentation Therefore, this shadow brings us back to integration. And narcissistic abuse shines a harsh light on these exiles, these parts of us that we've repressed or abandoned. And by confronting them, you begin to reclaim your power. Then there's also the whole notion of rebirth and empowerment. That finally, and I'm summarizing something that could take years and years and years, right? You finally emerge as a new version of yourself. And often survivors describe the stage as a spiritual rebirth. You set boundaries, you trust your intuition, and align with your purpose. There's no or very limited fragmentation. These traits that made you a target, which is your empathy, your sensitivity, and compassion, now become your biggest strengths as a light worker. So what's the evidence for all of this, right? Is it just some woo-woo talk? Well, we're in 2025, so we know the woo-woo talk is now verifiable, right? We're now in a new paradigm, the age of Aquarius. And I'll start with the mythology of the hero's journey. Joseph Campbell, famed mythologist, hero's journey offers a blueprint for spiritual awakening. Although the notion of a blueprint obliterates the whole idea of awakening, as has been enforced in the documentary Blueprints of the Awakened Masters, right, by John David. If you haven't seen it, I recommend that you see it. Every hero faces a call to adventure, a trial, and a transformation. And narcissistic abuse is your trial. You know, it's like Persephone descending into the underworld. You're forced to face the darkness, but this descent is also your initiation into wisdom and power. Then when we look at it also from a neuroscience perspective, trauma rewires your brain, but healing rewires it again. Therefore, practices like mindfulness, which is awareness, meditation, which is communion with self, yoga, and therapy or coaching with a certified coach like myself, and if I can be of help to you, type transform in the comment section, can help activate neuroplasticity. And you can do this by yourself. You can self-initiate, allowing you to build resilience and new neural pathways, you see. And this is how you know post-traumatic growth is real, PTG. Then when you look across spiritual teachings, across cultures, suffering is seen as a gateway to enlightenment. In Buddhism, the First Noble Truth, for example, acknowledges that suffering is inherent to life, but it's also a starting point for liberation. And then in Hermetic philosophy, the principle of correspondence, Hermetic philosophy from ancient Egypt, the principle of correspondence teaches us that as we transform our inner world, our outer world shifts as well, because the reality is there's nothing outside. It's all a projection of what's within. And random occurrences where the observer realizes that the observer is not the doer, there is doing, if you can agree with that. So how do you embrace your transformation, particularly if you're in the midst of this journey? And here are some ideas. They're not exhaustive, but some ideas to help you is knowledge is power. So educating yourself, reading books on trauma and spirituality, watching videos, TikToks, help, right? And for me, one of my favorite books on understanding trauma is actually by Dr. Gabor Mate, right? The Myth of Normal, right? The Myth of Normal. The Myth of Normal, right? The Myth of Normal. So getting to this, seeking professional support, and if I can be of help to you, type transform in the comments section and let us know what you're dealing with, right? So seeking professional support can be very pivotal. Then daily practices, having a discipline on a daily basis, whether it's meditation, mindfulness, yoga, journaling, affirmations, these are all powerful, and you have to find what works naturally for you, right? And then understand that healing is not linear, so you honor the process. Be patient with yourself. Practice self-compassion. Talk to yourself as you would a newborn, as a regular person would speak to a newborn. Recognize that each setback is part of your greater spiral to ascent. My dear friends and family, narcissistic abuse, although painful, is an initiation to your greatest self. It calls you to break old patterns, heal generational wounds, and step into your purpose. and recognize that there's absolutely no one like you, which is why you had to go through this pain in order to shine your light. If this resonates, type transform, subscribe, and see you later. Peace.